The silence following Harin's sudden calm was more deafening than his screams had been. Kang Jun-hyuk stared at the girl's hand, small, steady, and dangerously close to his son's face. His bodyguards had already moved, a blur of dark suits and lethal intent, but Jun-hyuk raised a single, tattooed hand. The room froze. "How?" he rasped. The word felt like gravel in his throat. Nak-young didn't look up immediately. She was still whispering to the boy, her thumb tracing a soothing rhythm behind his earlobe. "He's not acting out, sir," she said, her voice a sharp contrast to the cold elegance of the room. "The lights in here hum at a frequency that hurts his ears. The perfume of the lady at table 4 is too strong. He's just trying to survive the noise." She finally looked up, and Jun-hyuk felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine curiosity. There was no fear in her eyes, only a weary, working-class impatience. She withdrew her hand, tucked her tray under her arm, and walked away before he could offer a word of thanks or a threat of execution. The obsession began that night. Jun-hyuk returned to his fortress-like mansion, but the image of the girl remained. He was a man who lived by the code of total information. He knew the bank accounts of his enemies and the sins of his allies, yet he couldn't understand why a girl who made less in a month than he spent on a bottle of scotch didn't flinch at his shadow. "Find her," he commanded. By the following evening, he knew her name was Lee Nak-young. He knew she worked 3 jobs and lived in a rooftop room that leaked when it rained. Most importantly, he knew she delivered for a small, greasy chicken shop 3 blocks from the mansion. At 9 p.m., the first order was placed. When Nak-young arrived at the massive iron gates, she was met not by a butler, but by 6 men in tactical gear who searched her delivery box as if it contained a bomb. When she finally reached the front study, Jun-hyuk was sitting behind a desk of carved obsidian. "The gate code is too long," she complained, slamming the box onto his desk. "And your guards almost crushed the pickled radish." Jun-hyuk ignored the chicken. He watched the way she stood, shoulders back, chin up. "You have no idea who I am, do you? I know you're the guy who owes me $12 for the delivery plus a tip for the 20-minute security check." She snapped. He leaned forward, the light catching the jagged scar on his jaw. He wanted to see her hand shake. He wanted to see the moment the normal world realized it had stepped into the mouth of a shark. But Nak-young just tapped her foot, checking her watch. "I have 3 more deliveries, Mr. Kang. Are we doing this, or am I leaving?" For the first time since Harin stopped speaking, Jun-hyuk felt the ghost of a smile. "See you tomorrow, Miss Lee." "Not if you don't tip better," she called over her shoulder as her scooter buzzed away into the night. Jun-hyuk looked at the cold chicken on his desk. He wasn't hungry for food. He was hungry for the secret of her courage. The nightly delivery had become a ritual of psychological warfare. Jun-hyuk didn't even want the food. He wanted to see if the cracks in Nak-young's armor would finally show. Tonight, however, the air felt different. The humid Seoul night was too quiet, the shadows near the mansion's secondary service entrance stretching like reaching fingers. Nak-young pulled up on her battered, neon-stickered scooter, the engine rattling like a tin can full of nails. Jun-hyuk was waiting by the gate, a rare move that made his hovering bodyguards visibly twitchy. He reached for the delivery bag, but the transaction never finished. The first shot didn't sound like a gun. It sounded like a dry branch snapping. Then, the windshield of the black SUV parked 10 feet away shattered into a spiderweb of crystal. "Down!" Jun-hyuk roared, his instinct for survival overriding his curiosity. He lunged, his massive frame shielding Nak-young as he tackled her toward the pavement. A second round sparked off the stone pillar where her head had been a second ago. From the darkness of the street, 2 silver sedans screeched into view, blocking the main exit. Men with suppressed submachine guns spilled out, their movements disciplined and lethal. Jun-hyuk's own men returned fire, but they were pinned. The attackers had accounted for the SUVs, the armored gates, and the heavy security. They hadn't accounted for a 50 cubic centimeters delivery scooter. "Get in the house," Jun-hyuk commanded, reaching for his concealed sidearm. "The house is a cage, you idiot. They're flanking the kitchen entrance." Nak-young screamed over the gunfire. She wasn't crying. She was angry. She scrambled up, grabbing her helmet and slamming it onto her head. She kicked the kickstand of the scooter and revved the engine. Get on. Now. Jun Hyuk hesitated. He was a man who rode in bulletproof limousines, not on the back of a vehicle held together by duct tape and spite. Get on or die, boss man. He threw his leg over the narrow seat, his weight nearly bottoming out the suspension. Nak-young didn't wait for him to get comfortable. She twisted the throttle, and the scooter roared with a high-pitched whine. Instead of fleeing down the main road, she swerved directly into a gap between two houses. A drainage lay so narrow that Jun Hyuk's shoulders brushed the brick walls on both sides. The silver sedans tried to follow, but their frames ground against the stone, tires screeching in a futile metallic scream. Nak-young drove like a woman possessed, leaning the bike into sharp, 90-degree turns, weaving through piles of trash and hanging laundry. Behind them, the sounds of the hit squad faded, replaced by the rhythmic thud-thud of the scooter's tires over cobblestones. Jun Hyuk's hands were clamped around the girl's waist, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the back of her scuffed helmet. She was navigating the city's veins with a precision his GPS-guided security teams could never replicate. When they finally skidded to a halt in a dimly lit, anonymous parking lot miles away, the silence was heavy. Nak-young killed the engine. Her hands were finally shaking, but she didn't let go of the handlebars. Jun Hyuk dismounted, his expensive suit ruined, his blood singing with an adrenaline he hadn't felt in a decade. He looked at the tiny, vibrating machine and then at the girl. She had just delivered the one thing he couldn't buy, his life. "You're late with the chicken?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. Nak-young pulled off her helmet, her hair a mess, her eyes flashing. "You're paying for the extra gas, Jun Hyuk, and I'm charging a hazard fee." The morning light in the mansion's war room was cold, filtering through high windows to hit the digital maps and surveillance feeds that lined the walls. Jun Hyuk sat at the head of the table, surrounded by men in $10,000 suits who specialized in data encryption and global logistics. On a small stool in the corner, looking entirely out of place in her stained windbreaker, Nak-young sat nursing a cup of cheap instant coffee she'd brought herself. "We've scrubbed the footage from the restaurant and the alley," his chief of security reported, pointing to a high-definition freeze frame of the silver sedan. "The plates are cloned. The shooters wore standard tactical gear. No identifiable marks. They were ghosts." Jun Hyuk's eyes drifted from the screen to Nak-young. She wasn't looking at the map. She was staring at a secondary monitor showing the grainy CCTV of the street corner 3 minutes before the attack. "They weren't ghosts," she muttered, the steam from her coffee fogging her vision. "They were local." The room went silent. The chief of security bristled. "Miss Lee, we use facial recognition software that scans against every criminal database in Asia. If they were local, we'd have a name." Nak-young stood up, her sneakers squeaking on the marble floor as she walked to the screen. She didn't use a laser pointer. She just tapped a grubby fingernail against a man standing near a trash can in the background of the shot. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a cigarette. "Look at his shoes," she said. Jun Hyuk leaned in. The man wore heavy, rubber-soled boots. "Common construction gear." The chief dismissed. "No," Nak-young countered, her eyes narrowing with the sharp focus she used to navigate Seoul's labyrinthine shortcuts. "Look at the red clay on the heels. That's specific to the redevelopment zone in District 4. And look how he's holding that cigarette. He's tucking the cherry into his palm. That's a habit of guys who work the late-shift docks at the Han River. They do it so the wind doesn't burn the tobacco too fast and so the light doesn't give them away to the night patrols." She moved to the next frame. "And that silver car? It didn't come from the highway. It has a Golden Palace dry-cleaning hanger swinging from the rearview mirror. That place went out of business 6 months ago, except for the one location in the back alleys of Itaewon that only serves the night crowd." Jun Hyuk felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. His experts were looking for digital footprints, but Nak-young was reading the city's dirt. She had street eyes, a peripheral vision for the mundane details that power usually blinds a man to. She saw the world not as a map of targets, but as a living, breathing organism of habits and smells. The clay, the cigarette, the hanger, Jun Hyuk repeated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. He looked at his security chief, whose face had gone pale. She found in 3 minutes what you couldn't find in 12 hours. He turned to Nakyoung. She looked tired, her mind already drifting back to her missed shifts and unpaid bills. But Jun Hyuk saw her differently now. She wasn't just the girl who could calm his son. She was the girl who could see the invisible threads of the city. District 4, Jun Hyuk commanded, his gaze never leaving Nakyoung. Search every basement and dock, and get Miss Lee a seat at the table. A permanent one. Nakyoung scoffed, tossing her empty cup into a pristine wastebasket. Does the seat come with a dental plan? Because your street is a lot more expensive than mine. The obsidian desk was empty except for a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. Jun Hyuk didn't deal in digital contracts for things this sensitive. He dealt in ink and blood. Across from him, Nakyoung sat with her arms crossed, looking more like she was waiting for a bus than a life-altering proposal. You're a liability on a scooter, Nakyoung, Jun Hyuk began, his voice a cool shadow in the sprawling office. The rival clans now know your face. You can't go back to delivering spicy chicken and expect to live through the week. Nakyoung opened her mouth to argue, likely about her autonomy or her rent, but he raised a hand to silence her. However, I have a vacancy. My organization handles billions in assets, but we are blind to the street level. I need someone who can move through the city's cracks without triggering alarms. A personal courier for the Kong estate. He slid the paper toward her. The title was innocuous: Logistics and Private Transport Agreement. The salary listed at the bottom made Nakyoung's eyes widen for a fraction of a second before she masked it with a scowl. A courier, she repeated, her voice skeptical. You want me to carry your laundry and expensive watches? On the surface, yes. Jun Hyuk leaned forward, the light catching the sharp angle of his cheekbones. You will be seen delivering packages to my associates, scouting my new properties, and accompanying Harin to his appointments. But your real job is to be my eyes. When you enter a building, you aren't looking for the lobby. You're looking for the clay on the shoes. You're looking for who is nervous, who is smoking like a dock worker, and who is watching the door. You will deliver information to me that my men are too important to notice. Nakyoung picked up the pen, twirling it between her fingers. And what happens if I see something you don't like one of your own guys skimming off the top? Then you deliver that to me, too, Jun Hyuk said. Especially that. The room was silent as the weight of the choice settled. This wasn't just a job. It was an initiation. By signing, she was stepping out of the normal world and into the orbit of a man who played a much deadlier game. But she thought of Harin, the way he had finally stopped screaming when she touched his ear. And she thought of the debt collectors who wouldn't stop knocking on her rooftop door. One condition, she said, leaning over the desk. I keep the scooter. Your black SUVs are too easy to hit, and they can't make a U-turn in an alleyway to save their lives. Jun Hyuk's lips quirked, the closest he ever came to a laugh. Keep the machine. Just paint it a color that doesn't hurt my eyes. She scribbled her name at the bottom, the ink bold and messy. As she handed the pen back, her fingers brushed his. For a moment, the coldness of the mafia boss met the heat of the delivery girl, a silent acknowledgement that the game had officially changed. Your first delivery is tomorrow at 8 a.m., Jun Hyuk said, standing up. It's a toy for Harin. And Nakyoung, don't be late. The GPS is always right, boss, she shot back, already heading for the door. It's the world that's in the wrong place. The silk felt like a second skin, or more accurately, a trap. Nakyoung stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the Kong estate, barely recognizing the woman in the midnight blue gown. The dress was elegant, backless, and cost more than her entire neighborhood. Her calloused hands, usually stained with engine oil and grease, felt alien resting against the delicate fabric. You look uncomfortable. Jun Hyuk's voice drifted from the doorway. He was in a tuxedo that made him look less like a businessman and more like a weapon wrapped in velvet. I feel like a cat in a bathtub, Nakyoung snapped, struggling with a diamond earring. And these shoes are a human rights violation. If I have to run, we're both dead. Jun Hyuk walked over, his reflection looming behind hers. He took the earring from her shaking fingers and clicked it into place with practiced precision. His touch was cold, but steady. You aren't there to run. You are there to be the distraction. Every eye in that ballroom will be on me, wondering why I brought a nobody to the Blue Moon Gala. While they're busy judging you, you'll be watching them. The gala was a sea of champagne, fake smiles, and the heavy scent of lilies. As they entered the grand ballroom, the music didn't stop, but the atmosphere curdled. This was the Lion's Den, the clean side of the underworld where the real monsters wore medals and pearls. Jun Hyuk led her onto the floor, his hand firm on the small of her back. Table 6, he whispered as they began a slow, rhythmic waltz. The man with the silver eagle pin. Watch his hands when the chairman enters. Nakyoung didn't look. She leaned her head against Jun Hyuk's shoulder, playing the part of the infatuated date, but her street eyes were wide open. She scanned the perimeter not for weapons, but for the tells. She saw the way a waiter favored his left side, a sign of a hidden earpiece. She noticed the sweat on the brow of a senator despite the aggressive air conditioning. The silver eagle is a puppet, she murmured into his lapel, her voice barely a breath. He's looking at the balcony every 30 seconds. But look at the girl in the red dress by the bar. She's not drinking. She's counting the security rotations. And she's wearing the same brand of waterproof work boots under her skirt that the guys in the alley were wearing. Jun Hyuk's grip on her hand tightened. He didn't miss a step. Are you sure? I know those boots, Jun Hyuk. They're the ones that don't slip on red clay. Suddenly, the high society facade felt paper-thin. For a moment, the distance between the mafia boss and the delivery girl vanished. They were two hunters in a room full of wolves. As the song ended, a man approached with a predatory smile, the very man they suspected. A lovely addition to your collection, Kong? The trader purred. Reaching for Nakyoung's hand, Jun Hyuk stepped slightly in front of her, his aura shifting from host to predator. She's not part of a collection, director. She's the one who handles my most important deliveries. And tonight, she's just realized you're overdue. The gala's air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and betrayal. But as Director Park reached for Nakyoung's hand, a different smell cut through the floral fog. It was sharp, chemical, and out of place, the bitter tang of industrial degreaser. It was a scent Nakyoung knew intimately from cleaning the chain on her scooter, but it didn't belong on the skin of a man who wore $5,000 silk. She allowed Park to kiss her knuckles, her skin crawling as she felt the texture of his thumb. It was rough, the skin calloused in a specific crescent moon shape between the forefinger and the thumb. Her mind flashed back to the delivery 3 nights ago, the night of the assassination attempt. She hadn't just seen the shooters. She had seen the man who had checked their weapons in the shadow of the silver sedan. He had worn a ring that left that exact mark, and he had smelled of that same harsh solvent used to strip grease from a rifle's bolt. Your cologne is very striking, director, Nakyoung said, her voice a silk-wrapped blade. It reminds me of the docks in District 4. Very industrial. Park's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. A hobby of mine, Miss Lee. I enjoy working on vintage engines. Is that right? She turned slightly, catching Jun Hyuk's gaze. Then you must have been working on something very big lately. The scent is still under your nails. And that mark on your thumb. That's not from a vintage car. That's from the recoil of a customized K2 suppressor. The Blue Dragon modification, right? The silence that followed was a physical weight. Jun Hyuk didn't draw a weapon. He didn't have to. The air around him simply turned lethal. He stepped closer to Park, his voice a low, terrifying whisper that barely carried past the two of them. I was looking for a mole in the shadows, director. I didn't realize you were bold enough to stand in the light with my blood still under your fingernails. You're listening to a girl who smells like fried chicken. Park spat, his composure finally cracking. He signaled to the balcony, but the men in the waterproof boots didn't move. Nak-young had already pointed them out to Jun-hyuk's lead enforcer minutes ago. They were currently being silenced in the hallway. Nak-young stepped back, her street eyes locked on Park's trembling hands. It's not just the smell, Director. It's the habit. You've been tapping your ring against your glass in a 3-beat rhythm. It's the same signal the scout at the mansion gate used to tell the shooters we were coming out. Jun-hyuk reached out, his hand moving like a strike from a viper. He gripped Park's wrist, twisting it just enough to reveal a smudge of red clay, the same clay from the District 4 redevelopment zone, clinging to the underside of his expensive watch. Delivery confirmed, Jun-hyuk said, his eyes burning with a dark, satisfied fire. Nak-young, wait in the car. This next part isn't for the normal world. As she walked away, her heels clicking on the marble, Nak-young didn't look back. She had unmasked the monster, but she realized with a cold shiver that she was now officially part of the pack. The aftermath of the gala was not a celebration. It was a declaration of war. Within 48 hours, 3 of Jun-hyuk's warehouses were reduced to ash, and the streets of Seoul became a hunting ground. The rival clans, desperate now that their mole had been pulled from the shadows, were striking at anything that breathed near the Kong named. In the center of the storm, the mansion felt like a tomb. Jun-hyuk stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching the rain lash against the glass. Behind him, Nak-young was adjusting the straps on her deliveries. Not chicken anymore, but encrypted drives and medical supplies. Leave the keys on the table, Nak-young. You're done. The coldness in his voice was sharper than any blade she'd seen him carry. Nak-young stopped mid-motion, a roll of tape still in her hand. Excuse me? The contract is terminated, Jun-hyuk said, still refusing to turn around. Your debts are paid in full. There's a ticket to Jeju at the front desk and enough cash to keep you there for a year. Take Harin and go. A car is waiting to take you to the private terminal in 20 minutes. Nak-young dropped the tape. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. You're firing me? Now? When they're literally burning down your front door? I am removing a liability, he snapped, finally turning. His eyes were bloodshot, his face a mask of calculated cruelty. You were a tool for a specific job, Nak-young. You found the traitor. The street eyes have served their purpose. Now, the game is moving into a place where a girl on a scooter is nothing but a target I don't have the time to protect. Protect? Nak-young walked toward him, her anger radiating in the small space. Is that what you think this is? You think I'm some package you can just return to sender because the weather got rough? I'm the only reason you're still breathing, Jun-hyuk. I'm the only one Harin actually talks to. And that is exactly why you have to leave. His roar shook the room, his fist slamming into the obsidian desk. The mask slipped for a split second, revealing the raw, jagged terror of a man who had finally found something he was afraid to lose. They won't just kill you, Nak-young. They will use you to break me. They will make me watch while they undo everything you've built with my son. I can handle a war. I cannot handle that. He stepped toward her, his shadow swallowing her whole. You don't belong in this blood, Nak-young. Go back to your normal world, while there's still enough of it left to find. My world was never normal, she whispered, her voice trembling but her gaze unwavering. It was just lonely, until I met a man too stubborn to ask for help and a boy too scared to speak. She reached for her helmet, her fingers brushing the bruise on her arm from the gala. She didn't take the ticket. She didn't take the cash. She just looked at him with a pity that cut deeper than his anger. You're a coward, Kang Jun-hyuk. You're not protecting me. You're just making sure that when you die alone so it doesn't hurt as much. Well, fine. Enjoy your silence. She walked out, the heavy oak doors groaning as they closed behind her. Jun-hyuk stood in the center of his empire, surrounded by gold and guns, and realized for the first time that the silence was absolutely unbearable. The private terminal at Incheon was a ghost town, but Nak-young didn't look at the jet waiting to whisk her to safety. She looked at the small, leather-bound notebook in her lap, Harin's communication book. In the back pocket sat an encrypted drive she had swiped from Jun-hyuk's desk during their final argument. It contained the ledger of every bribe Director Park had ever paid to the rival clans. It was the only package that mattered now. "The flight is ready, Miss Lee," the guard prompted. "The flight can wait," she said, standing up and pulling her neon-yellow windbreaker over her shoulders. "I have one last delivery to make, and the recipient doesn't like to be kept waiting." She didn't use the mansion's SUVs. She went back to the rooftop room, kicked the dust off her battered scooter, and felt the familiar vibration of the engine between her knees. The city was a war zone. Blacked-out sedans prowled the main boulevards, but Nakyung lived in the veins of Seoul. She tore through construction sites and skidded down pedestrian staircases, her street eyes scanning for the red clay and the chemical scent of the enemy. The rival stronghold was a decommissioned shipyard, a maze of rusted steel and shadows. Jun-hyuk was already there, his forces pinned down in a brutal crossfire. He was fighting like a man with nothing left to lose, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his white shirt stained with oil and grit. He was surrounded, his ammunition running low, trapped behind a shipping container as the rival boss. A man named Beck, closed in for the kill. Suddenly, the high-pitched, frantic whine of a two-stroke engine cut through the sound of gunfire. Nakyung didn't slow down. She used a fallen loading ramp as a jump, the scooter catching air as she soared over the first line of Beck's guards. She skidded into the center of the kill zone, the bike sliding on its side as she used the momentum to kick a heavy, industrial-sized crate toward Jun-hyuk. "Nakyung!" Jun-hyuk screamed, his heart stopping as she rolled behind the container next to him. "I told you to leave, and I told you your GPS was broken," she yelled back, her face streaked with soot but her eyes blazing. She slammed the encrypted drive into his hand. "This is the ledger. It's not just money, Jun-hyuk. It has the coordinates of their main armory and the names of the police chiefs on their payroll. If you broadcast this now, they aren't just out of business, they're targets for the entire country." Jun-hyuk looked at the drive, then at the girl who had traveled through hell on a 50cc engine to bring it to him. The final delivery wasn't just data. It was the weapon he needed to end the war. "Cover me," he commanded, his voice regaining its steel. "Always do," she replied, reaching into her delivery bag and pulling out a flare gun she'd lifted from the shipyard's emergency kit. As the sky turned a blinding crimson, the tide turned. The data began to upload, the invisible threads of Beck's empire snapping one by one in real time. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The smoke over the shipyard cleared as the sirens of the state police neared, a sound that usually meant the end for a man like Jun-hyuk. But as the digital ledger Nakyung delivered rippled through the city's servers, the handcuffs weren't for him. He stood among the wreckage of Beck's empire, his hand resting on the handlebars of Nakyung's scorched scooter. He looked less like a criminal king and more like a man who had finally stepped out of a dark room. 6 months later, the Kong estate no longer felt like a fortress. The high stone walls remained, but the gates stood open. The fleet of black, armored SUVs that once signaled dread had been replaced by a line of high-end, custom-built electric motorcycles. They were painted a deep, professional navy, not the neon yellow Nakyung loved, but a compromise the boss could live with. Jun-hyuk sat in his office, the obsidian desk now covered in logistics manifests for Eagle Express, the city's first 100% secure, high-stakes courier service. He hadn't abandoned the underworld. He had simply legalized its most valuable asset, information. By controlling the flow of the city's most sensitive deliveries, he held more power than he ever had with a gun. A small, familiar figure ran into the room, his footsteps light on the hardwood. Harin didn't hesitate anymore. He didn't hide behind his father's chair. He held up a drawing of a blue motorcycle and spoke with a voice that was quiet, but clear. "Is she back yet?" "5 minutes," Jun-hyuk said, a genuine smile softening the hard lines of his face. "The GPS says she's just around the corner." A moment later, the distinctive hum of a motor echoed in the courtyard. Nakyung didn't enter through the service door. She walked through the front entrance, her logistics director blazer open over a simple t-shirt. She looked at the stacks of paperwork on Jun-hyuk's desk and smirked. "You're behind on the District 7 reports, boss man." And Table 9 in the city planning office is complaining about a late package. I was waiting for my chief informant to verify the route, Junhyuk replied, standing up to meet her. He didn't just see a delivery girl anymore. He saw the person who had mapped the path back to his own son and taught him that a reign built on fear is just a prison with better furniture. He reached out, his hand lingering on her shoulder, not as a command, but as a partner. The game has changed. Nakyoung, he murmured. No, she said, leaning into the touch as Harin grabbed her hand. The game is exactly the same. We're just the ones making the deliveries now. The city hummed outside, a vast machine of secrets and shortcuts. And at its heart, the boss and the delivery girl watched the lights flicker on, knowing exactly which ones were hiding the truth.